Hello and welcome to the Passion Driven Pioneers interview series. I'm your host, John Channon, and today I'm joined by Nichol Dehmer, who is the founder of Yard Homes Minnesota. Nichol, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for pronouncing my name correctly.
Okay, well, good. Would you like to just kick us off with a brief background as to who you are, what you do, and then the business that you're in?
I am actually a banker by trade. That's my schooling was public accounting, but my most of my experience, the first 30 years of my career, was working in financial institutions, and I dabbled in the housing space through the finance arm of housing, through various funding of housing projects, and then in starting up of mortgage companies, and then also through some volunteer work that I've done on different organizations locally that fund or have funded nonprofit housing, affordable housing. And that brought me to where I am today, which is the founder and owner of a tiny house company in Minnesota named YardHomesMN, actually.
So what was that initial spark that led you to kind of want to start up this company?
So I think when I left the financial institutions arena, I spent a little time through a consulting role that I had evaluating housing and housing production throughout the United States. And one of the things I've realized is that here in Minnesota, we didn't have tiny homes anywhere, really. We had a few cities, approximately less than 20, that allowed them, but we didn't have a lot of production happening. And so I saw other parts of the country were really taking advantage of using existing land and space to create tiny houses and tiny house footprints. And I just felt like there was kind of a need here in Minnesota to do something similar. And so that led me to launching Yard Homes. And when I say tiny houses, I always have to preface that with the fact that I do tiny houses that are permanently affixed to a foundation. A lot of times when people think of tiny houses, they'll think of, HGTV, Tiny House Nation, where they're typically on some sort of trailer and they're movable. The houses that I build are permanently affixed to a foundation, so just as similar to a traditional 1 to 4 family home. Sometimes they're referred to as accessory dwelling units because they're put in the backyard of an existing home, so they're considered accessory to something else. But really, they're basically just housing with a footprint of anywhere between typically 300 to 800 square feet.
That's interesting. Is it really targeted towards a certain clientele, your homes?
It's interesting. I always get the question of what is the use case, and there are a lot of use cases for these types of buildings. Sometimes they're just partial houses. They're maybe just an office for somebody in their backyard, or a place for them to have their business, a yoga studio or something like that. But a lot of times they are, fully functional houses, 1 bedroom, typically 1 bedroom, 1 bath, open living room concept with a full kitchen. And, it's a lot of generational living. And by generational living, it might be mom and dad looking to add additional space for somebody coming home from college or a disabled child. A lot of what we're seeing now, too, is mom and dad actually wanting to fund and pay for the tiny house that they want to put on their children's property because they want a space, they want to be close to their grandkids or they want to be in their kids' backyard. A lot of times those are situations where they might have another house in a, especially in Minnesota climate, we have a lot of people that spend part of their time outstate. And so it might be a situation where they spend their winters someplace warm. And when they're here in the summer, they just want another location that they can stop. So the use cases are wide and far between. But I would say, 90% of them are some sort of generational living situation.
Okay. How many years have you guys been in business?
So I've been in business since January of 2020.
Okay.
And we've seen a real uptick since then in cities, branching out and expanding their ordinances around ADUs or tiny homes so that they can be, built by right versus requiring some sort of variance to the building code to do this. So there has been quite a bit of growth in the space here in the Minnesota market. And I think across the country, I keep an eye on, all the, other areas of the country, east and west coast, and we're seeing a lot of growth as well um, in tiny houses.
So what were some of the things you needed to do that first year to kind of get your business up and going?
I think one key lesson I think that I've learned, and it if you can do it in the first year, that's even better, but is getting the right partners, right? So what is your business model going to actually be? And what role is your company going to play in that business model? So being in the construction industry, there's different phases to what delivers a house, right? So we had to figure out what part of that process were we going to be. We're going to be the design, we're going to be the sales, the architecture, the engineering, the actual construction, the procurement. And it has taken us it has taken us till probably 2024 to really figure out what our sweet spot is in that place and what is better, what pieces of that process are better for us to work with other partners to deliver the tiny houses. So
Talk a little bit about innovation in your industry and in your market. What are some of the things that you guys do to remain innovative, or how do you just kind of stay open to changes that are
well,
occurring?
it's interesting you should say that because we are in a very innovative product. I would say the construction industry by nature isn't very innovative,
Mhm.
especially the construction industry in Minnesota. However, the pandemic really changed people's mindset around constructing buildings and innovation. And one of it, one of the reasons was we're facing a huge labor shortage in this industry. And the other piece of it is that we have faced, astronomical increases in costs. Um, Materials for the construction industry have doubled since 2020. And so it's really forced builders to think differently about how they build. And we're still seeing that constantly in this space. An example of that I can tell you is that back in 2020, we were moving towards an example is 100% tankless water heaters, right? Because this was a product that came out that heated only the water that you were going to use, right? And heated on demand. And that was a real focus and a real energy saver. Well, the water heater industry has responded, and now we're starting to move back, especially in the Minnesota climate, to a tanked water heater because we're seeing that the tanks that are being developed now are so much more and better insulated that heating the water and holding the water heated is actually becoming less energy use than a tankless water heater that restarts every time you turn the water on. So the innovation is moving fast and furious in this space. And all we can really do is make sure that we're staying abreast with these industry changes and talking to our partners that are extended partners of our organization that are working in this space to make sure that we're bringing and delivering the best quality product. And we do, we're a tiny house company, but we also focus highly on energy efficient homes. And so that's, one of the spaces, like I said, where we're constantly having to take a look at what is the next best solution out there. And can that be integrated into our models?
Good. Would you maybe just share with us just a glimpse into your future plans and goals that you have for your business?
Yeah, so I mean, at one point in time, we wanted to really scale the business, and we definitely would love to scale to a point where you know we could do large development work. Right now, we're doing individual projects, so one project at a time, two projects at a time, typically. Um, in 2025, we hope to be consistently having 2 to 3 projects going at all time. Um, and but we also would love to see. Minnesota really hasn't adapted a tiny home village concept yet. We've had lots of discussions with various cities that have an interest in them. There just has not been a developer. We're not developers per se, but there has just not been a developer that has been able to get a city across the finish line with one of those. It would be amazing to see one of those happen in Minnesota. We'd love to be a part of it because I feel like if one of them got done where there was a whole community of tiny homes, I think it would be very replicable in a lot of other different cities in the state of Minnesota. And it just takes that first mover developer that wants to take that risk and with the right city partner to get that done. So,
And so how large of a plot of land would you be looking at to do a development like that? Because it
well,
take up a whole lot of space, right?
no, they only take up about 500 square feet.
Hmm.
So, on a normal city lot, you can usually put 2 to 3 units. So even if you're thinking about 10 homes, you only need probably 3 city lots to accomplish that and provide for enough green space for individuals. So it's not a huge, footprint that's necessary. I think the key is more around the zoning, the current zoning that exists um, for cities, and also some of that is also taking a look at can cities, because these homes are tiny and they don't use as much infrastructure as an existing, 1 to 4 family single family home. Can there be shared resources? Can there be a shared water connection point? Can there be a shared, access point for sewer? Those are some of the things that, a developer needs to work with the city on getting some acceptance of to really push forward and see a full neighborhood or a full development happen. Those are some of the things that we're seeing happen in other states where there are, lots of, down in Texas, there are lots of tiny home development companies or tiny home developments. And they're, capitalizing on being able to use some shared infrastructure to make that happen.
Yeah, hearing about the Texas energy grid every now and then, I could see where this would be a real boom for them down there.
Yep.
So, who is Texas maybe one of the more progressive states with respect to these? I think you call them ADUs, accessory
I would
dwelling.
say, yeah, Texas is definitely the Austin area. It's a footprint or an area where you've got a lot of single individuals that are living that don't need a lot of space, but it's also expensive to live there. So shrinking that space size helps them shrink their cost of living. Um, California is definitely very progressive, especially from a regulatory standpoint. They've made ADUs basically by right available across the entire state. And they've also put provisions in place that made people that have an ADU allowed to have another ADU, so you can actually have up to 3 houses on one lot. And then they've also made it legal for you to sell off the home without selling the land itself underneath the ADU. So they've really put in, and all with the intention of creating more housing so that they're creating, more housing and driving down that price point and creating more affordability, really, is what the goal is. So from a regulatory and ordinance standpoint, they are very progressive. From just a building and growth standpoint, warmer southern climates, we're seeing a lot of, use cases and, development. And part of that might be that there's a lot of more indoor outdoor living space. So even if you build something that's 500 square feet, that's not necessarily where you spend all of your time from a living space standpoint. So they've seen more growth than we have up here, but it definitely is growing and creeping up into the Midwest quite a bit faster than I had envisioned.
No, good. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us, Nicole. So, knowing that this show is targeted towards people who are probably going to be in their first couple years of business, do you have any final thoughts or words of advice you'd like to share with our audience today?
I would just say, I mean, final thoughts is that, it takes a lot of grit to start your own business, which means, you got to be able to do it all. And you also have to know that, the business will ebb and flow. No business typically takes off and immediately has success. So pivoting and figuring out what's working versus what isn't working so that you can just modify your business plan is really important, as opposed to just scrapping and giving up, because there are going to be times within those first couple of years where it feels like, you should just pack it in and go back to what you were doing. But in reality, if it's something that you believe in, it maybe just needs a little bit of a tweak. And then it'll take off again. So I think, and responsiveness to the marketplace, right? Knowing and getting real-time feedback on your product is important. And I do that quite a bit by hosting events for realtors locally about my product at sites where we've built them, so they can actually see them being built. Sometimes even sites where we're in production, so they can see one being physically put up. Really helps you get real-time feedback on the viability of what you're doing. So I think, having that grit, knowing when and how to pivot, and really having a place to get good market feedback from is important.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Nicole.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great really learning about these ADUs, as you call them, and this emerging industry here in the Twin Cities. So I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us today. And to everyone watching, I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.